Hi everyone, and welcome back to Stellar HFY. Thank you all for the incredible response to our Tactical Warfare series. Today, we're witnessing humanity through the eyes of an alien commander who spent 127 hours waiting for the inevitable betrayal. So, grab your headphones. Let's begin. Every alliance dies when tested. This is the first law of military cooperation, the immutable constant. When facing impossible odds, allies calculate survival probability and abandon the doomed to preserve their own strength. Show me a coalition that stayed loyal when staying meant death, and I will show you a lie told by historians who weren't there. Every alliance dies when tested. I am Commander Zeth Kari of the Valdoran Republic Fleet, and I have watched the mathematics of betrayal played out across 7 major conflicts. I have seen sworn brothers in arms abandon positions when casualties mounted. I have witnessed mutual defense treaties become worthless paper when honoring them required actual sacrifice. I have counted the precise moment when tactical reality overcomes political promises. The mathematics never lie. When survival demands choice between self and ally, every species chooses self. Every species. But there are stories told in the deep monitoring stations, stories of watchers who documented their own disbelief, stories of commanders who spent days waiting for the inevitable betrayal that never came, stories of the time the mathematics broke. This is one of those stories. The crisis began with long-range sensor data that made my strategic analysis systems recalibrate 3 times before accepting what they detected. Entropy storms, the cosmic hurricanes that had consumed inhabited systems across 3 galactic arms over the past millennium. Cascading dimensional rifts moving through space like death itself, destabilizing stellar matter, and rendering entire systems uninhabitable for centuries. The phenomenon appeared every 847 standard years with the precision of celestial clockwork. Our archives contained 17 confirmed storm tracks, each one marking the death of civilizations that thought they could evacuate in time. The survivors' accounts all told the same story. Space-time becomes unreliable, ships fail, people die, and worlds become monuments to mathematical impossibility. New Valdora sat directly in the storm's projected path. 0.3 million colonists, our most populous settlement beyond the core worlds, agricultural hub, manufacturing center, home to families who had invested 3 generations building something permanent among the stars, all of it about to become cosmic debris in 127 hours. The Valdoran Republic's aging evacuation fleet could extract perhaps half that number before the storm arrived. The mathematics were brutal and absolute. 1.2 million people would live, 1.1 million would die. The equations balanced with the precision of orbital mechanics. Unless someone helped. I transmitted distress calls to every member of the Galactic Mutual Defense Compact. 47 species bound by treaty to provide assistance during humanitarian crises. The responses arrived with identical bureaucratic efficiency. Strategic withdrawal advised. Valdoran colonial space designated hazard zone. Military assets cannot be risked for low-probability operations. The language was diplomatic, but the meaning was mathematical. No government would commit valuable ships and crews to an evacuation with survival rates approaching 0. Standard protocol. Logical decision-making. The alliance would preserve itself by abandoning the doomed. Every alliance dies when tested. Except one response violated every principle of rational strategic thinking. Human Colonial Defense Force en route, Admiral Chen, commanding 34 vessels, will assist with evacuation operations. 34 ships. The humans, who had joined the compact barely 18 months ago after their brutal war with the Korthak slaver empire, were committing their entire available fleet to our hopeless situation. a species barely 2 decades into galactic civilization, volunteering for certain death to save strangers. I knew the grim calculus. I had served in the Korthak conflict, witnessed 3 separate occasions when Allied forces abandoned their positions the moment casualties exceeded acceptable parameters. The Selenai Confederacy withdrew when losses reached 12%. The Marthan Collective retreated when their flagship took damage. The Korthak had learned to calculate precisely when each ally would break and run. Only the humans had stayed. Only the humans had kept fighting when fighting meant dying. Only the humans had honored their agreements when honor cost everything. But that was different. That was their war, their survival at stake. This was charity. This was dying for strangers with no strategic benefit. This was mathematics that made no logical sense. When Admiral Chen's fleet arrived, I assigned them to the outer system periphery, low-priority sectors, minimal civilian populations. I expected them to vanish the moment the entropy storm's effects became visible. Better to have them evacuate a few thousand refugees before retreating than lose their entire fleet attempting the impossible. Valdoran Command, this is Admiral Chen, her transmission carried across the tactical network with crisp military efficiency. Human forces ready to assist with evacuation operations. Please transmit population distribution data and evacuation priorities. I studied the tactical display showing 34 human vessels positioned in defensive formation around New Valdora's outer colonies. Small fleet, modest firepower, recent technology but nothing revolutionary. A token gesture that would end in predictable withdrawal when reality imposed its mathematics on noble intentions. The humans had helped us once before. During the Korthak War, when human colonies faced extermination and the galaxy turned away, Valdoran medical ships had violated neutrality agreements to evacuate human civilians. We had saved 1.7 million human lives at significant political cost, risking our own diplomatic standing to honor humanitarian obligations. Perhaps they remembered. Perhaps this was gratitude rather than alliance loyalty. Perhaps they felt some primitive emotional debt that overrode their survival instincts. It didn't matter. Mathematics would assert itself regardless of motivation, 1 hour until the storm arrived. 2.3 million people to evacuate. Insufficient ships. Impossible odds. The equations would balance themselves in blood and vacuum, and the humans would learn the first law of military cooperation. Every alliance dies when tested. The mathematics demanded it. But as I watched Admiral Chen's fleet maintain position in the face of approaching cosmic death, something in my analysis protocols began generating warnings I had never seen before. Error messages suggesting that my calculations might be missing variables, that the mathematics of alliance might contain factors I had never encountered. That perhaps, for the first time in my career, I was about to witness an equation that refused to balance according to the established laws. The humans held position. The storm approached. The mathematics waited to be tested. Time became the enemy. The entropy storm arrived 31 hours ahead of schedule, shattering every evacuation timeline we had calculated with the precision of engineers who had survived 17 previous storm encounters. Reality distorted like heated metal, and space-time itself became unreliable. The first-dimensional reassures, if tore through the outer system like a wound in existence itself. My tactical displays registered the impossible. Gravitational fields fluctuating beyond measurement parameters, stellar radiation spiking in patterns that violated physics, and navigation systems throughout the evacuation fleet, reporting position errors that suggested space was forgetting how to be consistent. 3 Valdoran transport ships simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, not vaporized, erased from reality so completely that their quantum signatures vanished from our sensors. 400,000 colonists trapped in New Valdora's northern industrial zones as dimensional rifts severed all approach vectors to their evacuation sites. All units, immediate withdrawal to minimum safe distance. I transmitted across the fleet command frequency. Standard protocol. Preserve functional assets, accept losses, and save what could be saved. The mathematics had changed, but the logic remained absolute. My own fleet commanders reported cascade failures throughout their vessels, engine malfunctions as power systems struggled against dimensional distortion, navigation computers generating contradictory solutions to basic trajectory calculations, hull stress fractures appearing spontaneously as the fundamental forces holding matter together became negotiable suggestions rather than physical laws. The logical response was retreat. Immediate extraction to 2.3 AU minimum distance and reassessment of evacuation capabilities under new parameters. We could save perhaps 800,000 refugees already aboard evacuation transports. The mathematics of acceptable losses demanded we preserve those lives rather than risk everything for the impossible. But Admiral Chen's transmission violated every principle of tactical preservation. Valdoran Command, Human Colonial Defense Force is repositioning to assist stranded population centers. Our engineering teams have developed temporary shielding modifications that provide limited protection against dimensional distortion. I stared at tactical displays showing human vessels moving deeper into the storm's influence zone. 34 ships accelerating toward dimensional rifts that had already claimed 3 Valdoran military units, their hulls visibly straining against reality warps that turned straight lines into geometric impossibilities. Admiral Chen, the storm cannot be fought, I transmitted, watching her fleet approach zones where physics had become optional. Only escaped before peak intensity renders evacuation impossible. Withdrawal is advised. Her response carried the weight of absolute mathematical certainty. Commander Zethkari, we've analyzed the storm's progression pattern through our quantum analysis systems. We calculate 73 hours before peak intensity makes civilian extraction impossible. That's sufficient time to extract all remaining population if we coordinate our operations and accept higher acceptable loss ratios for escort vessels. Accept higher loss ratios. The humans were discussing their own death with the clinical precision of engineers calculating structural tolerances, not desperation, not noble sacrifice driven by emotion. Strategic planning that treated their lives as acceptable currency for purchasing Valdoran survival. My long-range sensors tracked human vessels implementing modifications to their shield systems in real time. Engineering teams working in spacesuits while reality warped around them, installing equipment that transformed their defensive systems into something I had never encountered. Dimensional buffers, quantum stabilization fields. Technology that made space remember how to be consistent within small, mobile areas of effect. Engineering assessment complete, Chen's voice continued across the command frequency. Human vessels can maintain operational effectiveness within Class 3 dimensional distortion fields for extended periods. Sufficient capability for civilian transport escort through affected areas. The humans had spent their transit time to New Valdora developing countermeasures for a phenomenon that every other species considered unstoppable. They had analyzed dimensional storm mechanics and engineered solutions, while the rest of the galaxy declared the situation hopeless. But the true violation of tactical logic came when my sensors detected human fleet movements. Rather than establishing defensive perimeter at minimum safe distance, Chen's ships were penetrating deeper into the storm's influence zone. Individual vessels taking positions within 0.7 AU of active dimensional rifts to provide evacuation support for stranded civilian populations. Human vessels, your current position exceeds safe operational parameters, I transmitted, watching as dimensional distortions began affecting their hull integrity. Immediate withdrawal advised. Valdoran Command, we have 127,000 civilians in northern sectors requiring extraction support. Human Colonial Defense Force will maintain position to provide escort services. 7,000 civilians. Chen had calculated the exact number of Valdoran lives at risk and positioned her fleet to extract every single person. not acceptable percentages, not strategic priorities. Everyone. My analysis protocols struggled to categorize human tactical doctrine. They were implementing operations that treated civilian survival as the primary mission objective while treating their own fleet preservation as secondary consideration. Military logic inverted. Strategic thinking that prioritized the protected over the protectors. Admiral, our evacuation capacity is insufficient for complete population extraction, I transmitted, sharing the mathematical reality that governed all evacuation operations. Standard protocol requires priority selection based on strategic value and survival probability. Chen's response came after a pause that lasted exactly 4.7 seconds. Commander Zethkari, human tactical doctrine does not recognize acceptable losses when civilian populations are involved. We will extract everyone, or verify that extraction is impossible through direct attempt rather than mathematical projection. Direct attempt rather than mathematical projection. The humans were rejecting the fundamental principle of strategic planning. They were choosing to test reality through action, rather than accept defeat through calculation. I watched 34 human ships spread across New Valdora's system like islands of stability in an ocean of dimensional chaos. Each vessel maintaining position within zones that should have torn them apart, their modified shielding systems creating pockets where physics functioned normally enough for evacuation operations to continue. The mathematics no longer made sense. Standard tactical doctrine demanded fleet preservation over civilian rescue when survival probability dropped below acceptable thresholds. The humans were implementing doctrine that made civilian rescue the acceptable threshold for fleet preservation. They had inverted the equation. And somehow, impossibly, their modified mathematics were producing results that violated every strategic model in our databases. Human engineering teams were extracting civilian populations from areas my own commanders had declared unreachable. Human escort vessels were maintaining formation in dimensional distortion fields that had destroyed Valdoran military units. Human tactical doctrine was achieving objectives that standard military mathematics declared impossible. The storm continued to intensify. The humans continued to advance. The mathematics continued to break. The intercepted communications told a different story. Fragments of human fleet transmissions that my intelligence systems captured during routine monitoring. Conversation. SI initially dismissed as standard operational chatter, background noise in the constant stream of tactical communications flowing between Admiral Chen's vessels. Now they revealed the mathematical horror of human strategic planning. Destroyer Group 7, acceptable loss. Probability for current sector, 67%. Proceed with civilian extraction operations. Acceptable loss probability, 67%. The humans were discussing their own deaths with statistical precision while positioning their ships to save Valdoran refugees, not desperation driving them toward heroic suicide. Clinical analysis that calculated their lives as acceptable payment for civilian survival. I accessed deeper communication intercepts, fragments captured by our surveillance systems during the past 18 hours. What I discovered forced my strategic assessment protocols to generate error reports. Admiral Chen to Fleet Command, implementing acceptable loss protocols per emergency doctrine 7-7 Alpha. Fleet Division, priority survival units responsible for refugee transport, expendable assets tasked with protective screening. Expendable assets. The humans had classified their own ships, their own crews, as resources to be consumed in calculated exchange ratios for Valdoran civilian survival. Military doctrine that treated their people as currency. Engineering assessment indicates total hull loss probability for vessels operating within 0.3 AU of dimensional rifts, another transmission revealed. Acceptable trade-off for extended evacuation window. Proceed with sequential sacrifice protocols. Sequential sacrifice protocols. The humans had developed strategic doctrine for organized self-destruction, not desperate last stands driven by emotion. systematic planning that optimized their deaths for maximum civilian rescue effectiveness. But the intercepted communications revealed something that made my analysis systems struggle to process the data. Admiral Chen's personal log, transmitted to Earth Command through Quantu, relay systems that my sensors had captured fragments of. Personal log, Admiral Chen, Day 14 of New Valdora evacuation operations. Fleet morale remains high, despite 67% projected casualty rate. Crew psychological evaluations indicate universal acceptance of mission parameters. Universal acceptance. Every human crew member had volunteered for statistical death, not orders imposed from above. Personal choice made by individuals who had calculated the cost and decided Valdoran lives were worth their own sacrifice. Mission context requires historical notation, Chen's log continued. During the Korthak-Slaver War, when human colonial populations faced extermination and galactic community declared strategic withdrawal advisable, Valdoran medical ships violated neutrality agreements to evacuate 1.7 million human civilians. Historical context. The foundation that explained human strategic doctrine in mathematical terms I could finally understand. Valdoran Republic risked significant political cost to honor humanitarian obligations when no other species would accept refugee populations. Current operation represents what Human Colonial Defense Force terms honor debt fulfillment, strategic obligation to repay assistance received during our hour of greatest need. Honor debt fulfillment. The humans had created military doctrine based on reciprocal obligation. They were dying for us because we had risked political standing to save them. Mathematical equation where past assistance calculated future sacrifice. I accessed classified Valdoran archives, reviewing records from the Korthak War that I had never connected to current operations. The data confirmed Chen's historical assessment with precise numerical accuracy. Valdoran Medical Corps had evacuated 1,743,000 human civilians from 17 colony worlds under direct Korthak threat. Operation conducted despite formal neutrality agreements that prohibited military intervention. Political cost. Suspension from 3 trade confederations, diplomatic protests from 7 species, and significant economic sanctions. We had saved human lives when saving them violated our own strategic interests. Now they were dying to save ours. Strategic analysis concludes that Valdoran's sacrifice during Korthak War established precedent requiring reciprocal response. Chen's log revealed the mathematical foundation of human commitment. Honor debt calculation. 1,743,000 human lives preserved through Valdoran risk acceptance. Current operation targeting 2,300,000 Valdoran civilian extraction. Exchange ratio acceptable. Exchange ratio acceptable. The humans had calculated the precise number of their own lives that equaled the debt they owed for our previous assistance. They weren't dying for strangers, they were dying for friends who had already proven willing to die for them. Personal assessment. Chen's final log entry concluded with words that would haunt my strategic thinking for the remainder of my career. The Valdorans risked their political standing to save our people when no other species would acknowledge human civilian refugees. Today we discover if honor means anything, when dying for it is the price of maintaining it. Honor as strategic doctrine, not emotional concept, mathematical principle that calculated past assistance into future obligation. The humans had weaponized gratitude and pointed it at their own survival instincts. But the communications revealed more than philosophical commitment. They showed tactical precision that transformed noble sentiment into effective military action. Fleet Division, Alpha, Priority Survival Vessel, maintain minimum safe distance while providing refugee transport capability. Mission parameters, survive to ensure civilian extraction completion. Fleet Division Beta, Expendable Asset Screening Force, maintain maximum effective range within dimensional distortion fields. Mission parameters, delay storm effects to extend evacuation window, regardless of hull loss probability. The humans had divided their fleet based on mathematical optimization of sacrifice. Some ships designated to survive, ensuring mission completion. Others designated to die, maximizing time available for civilian rescue. Strategic planning that balanced noble intention with tactical effectiveness. I found myself studying human tactical doctrine with the fascination of someone encountering new mathematics. They had solved the fundamental equation of military alliance, how to honor commitments when honoring them required self-destruction. Their solution was simple: calculate the debt, accept the cost, pay with precision. The mathematics of honor turned out to be more complex than the mathematics of betrayal, and far more effective than anything in our strategic databases. The humans weren't dying for us because they were noble. They were dying for us because they were accounting for debts with the precision of engineers balancing equations. The numbers added up, the honor balanced, and somehow, impossibly, their mathematics of sacrifice were producing results that our mathematics of survival never could. The storm learned to hunt. 73 hours into the evacuation, the dimensional rifts stopped appearing randomly and began targeting ships with thermal signatures. The entropy storm's effects evolved beyond chaotic destruction into something that resembled predatory intelligence, forcing evacuating vessels to choose between speed and stealth. Both choices led to death. Fast evacuation runs generated heat signatures that drew dimensional rifts like cosmic predators sensing wounded prey. Stealth approaches extended exposure time in distortion fields that gradually tore ships apart at the molecular level. The mathematics of survival offered no solutions, only different methods of dying. The humans chose a third option: implementing sequential overwatch protocol. Admiral Chen's transmission reached every vessel in the evacuation fleet with crystalline clarity. Human units will provide individual sacrifice screening to draw rift attention from civilian transports. Sequential overwatch protocol. Individual human ships positioning themselves as bait to distract dimensional rifts from Valdoran refugees. Not random heroism. Systematic tactical sacrifice optimized for maximum civilian rescue effectiveness. I monitored the protocol's implementation through my long-range sensors with the fascination of someone watching new mathematics being written in blood and vacuum. Human vessels spreading across New Valdora's system in precisely calculated patterns, each ship taking position to create overlapping fields of protective screening. The first sacrifice was the destroyer Steadfast. Commander Sarah Martinez positioned her vessel within a Class 5 dimensional distortion field, using the ship's modified shielding to create a stable corridor for refugee transports. 67,000 Valdoran civilians evacuated through the passage she maintained while reality warped around her hull. Steadfast to Valdoran Transport Group 12. Martinez's voice carried across the tactical network with professional calm. Evacuation corridor stable for next 11 minutes. Recommend maximum acceleration through Grid 77 Alpha. 11 minutes. She had calculated exactly how long her ship could survive in conditions that violated the fundamental laws of physics. Not hope, not desperation. Engineering analysis that measured her crew's lives in precise temporal units. I watched the Steadfast maintain position as dimensional rifts tore at her hull plating, structural integrity dropping in measurable increments, life support systems failing in sequence, the ship dying by degrees while her commander maintained evacuation support with the precision of a chronometer counting down to 0. Transport Group 12 clear of distortion field, Martinez transmitted as the last refugee ship reached minimum safe distance. Steadfast mission parameters fulfilled. The dimensional rift consumed her vessel 3 minutes later. Reality forgot the destroyer had ever existed, erasing 847 human crew members from the universe as completely as if they had never been born. 67,000 Valdoran civilians reached safety. The mathematics balanced. The next sacrifice was the frigate Determined. Captain James Rodriguez coordinated the evacuation of New Valdora's primary spaceport, positioning his ship within the atmospheric interference zone where dimensional effects created navigation hazards that made precision flying impossible. His vessel served as a stationary reference point, transmitting navigation data and refugee manifests, while evacuation shuttles used his position to calculate safe approach vectors. Determined to all evacuation craft, Rodriguez's transmissions continued even as dimensional distortions tore through his ship's superstructure. Navigation beacon active, refuge coordinates updating in real time, maintain approach pattern 7 Alpha until further notice. I monitored his ship's deterioration through sensor readings that documented systematic destruction. Hull breaches venting atmosphere into space, power systems failing in cascade sequence, bridge superstructure collapsing as reality became negotiable. Found his position. Rodriguez maintained transmissions until dimensional rifts tore through his command center, ending his voice mid-sentence as physics forgot his existence. 134,000 Valdoran civilians evacuated through navigation data he had provided while dying. The mathematics continued to balance. Admiral Chen's flagship Perseverance took the final position, the most dangerous position. Communication relay and navigation beacon at the storm's edge, where dimensional effects were strongest and survival probability approached 0. Chen positioned her vessel to serve as coordination hub for all evacuation operations, ensuring that scattered refugee ships could maintain contact with evacuation fleets despite communication interference from dimensional distortions. Perseverance to all units, Chen's voice reached across the expanding chaos with unwavering authority. Fleet coordination active, evacuation status updates processing, maintain mission parameters until final transport clears atmospheric interference. I watched her ship strain against reality warps that made straight lines curve and turned time into a flexible suggestion rather than absolute constant. The Perseverance served as an island of stability in an ocean of dimensional chaos, her modified shielding systems creating a pocket where communications functioned normally enough to coordinate the evacuation of an entire world. But the storm was reaching peak intensity. The mathematics of survival dictated immediate withdrawal for any vessels hoping to escape before dimensional effects rendered space travel impossible. Admiral Chen, I transmitted directly to her flagship. Our sensors indicate 127,000 civilians still surface-bound. Valdoran fleet doctrine requires immediate withdrawal to preserve evacuation assets. Her response carried the weight of mathematical certainty that I had learned to recognize as distinctly human. Commander Zethkari, Human Colonial Defense Force will maintain evacuation support until final transport clears atmospheric interference or until operational capability is eliminated. Acceptable loss calculations confirm current mission parameters. Until operational capability is eliminated. Chen was stating her intention to maintain position until her ship was destroyed or every Valdoran civilian was safely evacuated. Not heroic rhetoric. Strategic commitment expressed in precise military language. I realized I was witnessing military doctrine that treated honor as a tactical resource more valuable than survival. The humans had calculated their obligations with engineering precision and were implementing those calculations regardless of cost. 1,000 Valdoran lives remained at risk. Chen's fleet would stay until every single person reached safety. The mathematics of sacrifice had become more reliable than the mathematics of self-preservation. The storm continued to intensify. The humans continued to maintain position. The mathematics continued to prove that honor could be calculated with greater precision than fear. The final transport cleared New Valdora's atmosphere with 7 hours and 23 minutes remaining before peak storm intensity would render the system uninhabitable for the next 3 centuries. I watched the last refugee ship reach minimum safe distance while 8 surviving human vessels maintained formation around the dying world. 8 ships out of 34. 26 vessels consumed by dimensional rifts in precisely calculated sacrifice sequences that had saved every Valdoran civilian who could be saved. 287,000 souls evacuated. A 99.4% success rate that would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. The mathematics of impossibility had balanced in humanity's favor. Admiral Chen's final transmission reached us across the expanding distortion field as reality continued to collapse around her damaged flagship. Valdoran Command, this is Human Colonial Defense Force. Evacuation operations complete. All surviving human vessels withdrawing to rendezvous coordinates. Honor debt fulfilled. Honor debt fulfilled. 4 words that contained more strategic significance than entire libraries of military doctrine. The humans had calculated their obligation with mathematical precision and implemented payment regardless of cost. The entropy storm reached full intensity 18 minutes later, dimensional rifts collapsing New Valdora's infrastructure into exotic matter configurations that would serve as a monument to civilian courage and military sacrifice. The world that had housed 2.3 million Valdoran colonists became another uninhabitable marker in space, but its population lived on 17 different worlds where refugee resettlement operations created new communities from the ashes of the old. But the true consequences extended far beyond mere survival statistics. Within 6 months, the Valdoran precedent became the standard reference point for humanitarian military operations throughout the Galactic Mutual Defense Compact. When the Seraphim Collective faced similar disaster from a rogue pulsar's radiation wave, 7 species volunteered evacuation assistance. The Marthan Collective's response to volcanic system collapse brought 12 allied fleets. The ancient crystalline communes received support from 19 different military organizations when solar flare activity threatened their habitat clusters. Every operation cited precedent established during Valdoran evacuation as justification for risking military assets to save civilian populations. The humans had created a revolution in galactic strategic thinking by proving that honor could be implemented as effectively as self-interest. The political transformation reached beyond humanitarian operations. The Korthak Slaver Empire, shamed by human sacrifice during a conflict where they had shown none, negotiated formal reparation treaties and mutual defense agreements. Species that had ignored human diplomatic overtures for decades suddenly found value in alliance with beings who treated promises as binding mathematical equations. Human Reliability Coefficient, 98.7% contract fulfillment rate across all strategic commitments, the Galactic Economic Council's analysis reported. Recommended for priority trade partnership status and expanded diplomatic engagement. Military reliability had translated into economic opportunity. Political trust had become profitable resource. The humans had discovered that honor was not just moral philosophy, it was strategic advantage that paid compound interest across multiple sectors. I served my remaining career as liaison between human and Valdoran military commands, documenting tactical innovations born from our coordinated operations. The humans shared their dimensional shielding technology freely, transforming evacuation doctrine across 47 species. Their sequential overwatch protocols became standard emergency response procedure for disaster relief operations. But the most significant change was philosophical rather than technical. Military alliance theory required complete revision to account for forces that treated promises as binding contracts rather than diplomatic suggestions. Strategic planning had to incorporate new variables, honor debt calculations, reciprocal obligation matrices, and commitment sustainability analysis. The mathematics of cooperation became more complex and infinitely more reliable. In my final after-action report, archived in both species military academies and distribute, to every member of the Galactic Mutual Defense Compact, I documented conclusions that would influence strategic doctrine for the next millennium. I have commanded evacuation operations in 4 major disasters and witnessed standard alliance protocols result in acceptable loss ratios averaging 23% civilian casualties. During the New Valdora evacuation, I spent 127 hours expecting human forces to withdraw when tactical doctrine demanded retreat. They maintained position until extraction operations achieved 99.4% success rate because their strategic doctrine values honored debt fulfillment over acceptable losses. Military alliance theory requires fundamental revision to account for forces that calculate obligations with mathematical precision and implement those calculations regardless of survival probability. Traditional strategic models assume self-preservation as primary motivation. Human tactical doctrine operates on reciprocal obligation principles that create strategic reliability coefficients approaching absolute certainty. Recommendation: alliance agreements with human forces should be considered binding contracts with near-zero default probability. Strategic planning can incorporate human commitments as fixed variables rather than probability assessments. Honor-based tactical doctrine produces measurably superior results compared to self-interest optimization in humanitarian operations. The galaxy learned to count differently after New Valdora. Honor became a mathematical constant rather than emotional variable. Promises transformed from diplomatic language into engineering specifications. And somewhere in the deep monitoring stations where intelligence officers track fleet movements and calculate alliance probability matrices, new formulas balanced equations with variables that previous generations of strategists had never encountered. The humans had taught us that some mathematics were more reliable than physics, that some equations balanced in directions we had never calculated. There, at the most complex strategic problems sometimes had the simplest solutions. Keep your word regardless of cost, and let the mathematics sort themselves out. The universe learned their arithmetic, and found that honor was the most profitable investment in the galaxy.